Hello, Camp Pros. This is Oliver Gregan, Summer and Family Camps Director at YMCA Camp Jewel.
And I'm Matt Hansberger. I'm the executive producer of podcasting at Go Camp Pro, and you are listening to First Class Counselors.
This is a series for the camp directors to give to their counselors as they hire and prepare them for the upcoming summer.
That's right, because whether camp is happening in 2020 or happening in 2021 or 2022, let's be real, people. It's different for all of us. Summer camp thrives on great counselors. And whether it's a virtual summer camp, an in-person summer camp, or a little bit of both, counselors that are awesome are the key to campers coming back and connecting with camp. When we ask campers their favorite thing about camp, 9 times out of 10, they're going to say it's the staff. So the reason we do what we do is because we want to make amazing staff members. So thank you for listening to this and investing in yourself, becoming a first-class counselor.
Yep, and in today's more virtual world, our podcast is fantastic for you to send to your staff to help getting them ready for summer when you don't know how many trainings they may be able to get to. So thank you for tuning into FCC. We're here to cover one specific topic today. We're going to cover the essentials as fast as we can.
It'll be the need-to-knows.
The can't go without.
The fundamentals.
The basics. So what are we talking about today? We're talking about feedback. As a counselor, you're going to get a lot of feedback. Most of it is typically tough to hear or difficult to adapt to because you are ultimately you, and some things are hard to change. How you receive that feedback and interpret it, though, is really important. We are mostly going to be talking today about the tough conversations, but we want everyone to know that feedback is all positive because in the end, it is in the aim to get better. If you keep that growth mindset, these conversations will not only be productive, but a lot easier. So let's get started with perspective. What's the perspective of the person who's giving the feedback to you? It's really tough to be receiving feedback and think about the person who's sitting across from you having to tell you. Matt, as someone who's been in that seat of both receiving and giving feedback, what are some things that you know?
Yeah, I think I read a really great book called The Art of Possibility by Roz and Ben Zander. And they talk about this concept in it of giving everybody an A. And then Brene Brown also says that, let's start with the perspective that everyone in the room is doing their best and in there with the best intentions. If we start with that positive intent, then we realize that, like you said off the top, Oliver, that it's about getting better and it's about helping camp be a better place for kids. So, sometimes it can be nerve-wracking to give the feedback as well as to get the feedback. So we're all in a pretty vulnerable place when we're in that room getting feedback. And I think it's just important to remember that that growth mindset is so important because the feedback is coming from different places that you're getting it to. It might be my job as the head counselor or the unit leader to give you feedback as a counselor, but remember that I'm getting that information from multiple different places. Maybe a director is walking through and sees you as a counselor doing something that needs correction. They're not necessarily going to be giving you that feedback because maybe it's an evaluation where it's my turn to do that. So, and people don't see you 24/7 too, right? So they only see the little bits and the little bits of the good and the bad, and the feedback is just like a small chunk of who you are. And if we take that feedback with the idea that, okay, like we saw this, let's ask questions, let's be curious, that's where we can find some success. But it's definitely vulnerable and it can be awkward the first couple times you do it.
Yeah, I love your point that people sometimes who have to give feedback may be only seeing snippets, right? They're not with you 24/7. I remember as a kid growing up, you get those chores from mom and you sometimes do those chores, but she doesn't see them get done. So something like washing the dishes, if it's not seen, it never happened. So I remember as a kid always waiting for mom to get home before I would press that button or clearing out the dishwasher so that my mom would clearly see Oliver's doing his chores.
Yeah.
Now, as the person who's giving feedback, right, you have a lot going on with you, right? You either A, are doing it instinctually, right? Like you see something wrong, it has to get fixed. It's an order of operation for you. You're not always just initially thinking about what that person that you're giving the feedback is feeling because you're just trying to fix the problem, right? So it's instinctual, right? It's a natural reaction that you just go, oh, that's wrong. Let's fix this, right? For you, you fixed it 100 times. For them, it may be the first time they're fixing it. So, or for you as the person who's fixing it, might be your first time. For them, they've tried to fix that problem 100 times before with 100 different counselors. The option B is a well thought out feedback. Typically, they're going to be asking you to sit down They've thought about what they want to talk to you about. We'll talk about that sit down kind of operation before, but if they're thinking about giving you feedback and they've thought about that process, know that they're coming into it prepared, but also with the intention of trying to help and fix something. So don't just shut down right there off the bat. Know that they're there. And then option C, it's something that needs to happen, right? They're not ignoring a problem that you might be doing unintentionally, intentionally, whatever it might be. They need to do something. It's their job to give you the feedback to fix whatever's going on. This person, and as someone who's given feedback, I typically have like sweaty palms, blood rushes to my face. You feel that weird warm feeling. Your gut feels really uncomfortable because you're about to tell someone something that they probably don't want to hear in as positive a way as you can. So understand that for the person who's giving the feedback, it is almost just as uncomfortable for them sometimes to have to tell you, hey, there's something we need to fix. Can we talk about it? So that's really important, I feel, is to get the perspective of the person who has to give the feedback, right? If you're stepping into their shoes and they're trying to step into your shoes and both understand each other, you're off to a better start. Matt, did you have anything else about perspective you wanted to add?
No, I think you nailed it, Oliver. I appreciate all those things you said.
So let's talk about the actual listening to the feedback and making sure that you understand what they're asking of you. How do you go about that to make sure that you're getting the clear message? This is all about communication, but Matt, can you tell us how to make sure that communication is happening properly?
Yeah, Oliver, thanks. I think that before we kind of get into the nitty gritty, I want to give you the mindset that when you're getting feedback, you really want to compartmentalize the things that you can control and the things you can't control about that situation, right? And it's one of those classic things. You can't control what happens to you necessarily. You can only control your reaction to it, right? So you don't always get to choose how good the person is at giving you feedback, right? Because not everyone is good at giving feedback. That's a skill that we could do a whole episode for leadership team members. We're going to talk a little bit about it, but we could do a whole episode on how to give feedback. So maybe they're not great yet at giving feedback, and maybe it's not going to be in the exact format that you generally like to receive feedback, but it's your job as the counselor, as the person who's listening, to be curious and be like, okay, well, what do I have control over in this situation? And often the control you have is to ask questions or to just internalize it and be like, okay, yeah, I screwed up. I'm going to make this better.
Yeah, I love your point that the person giving feedback may not always be perfect at it, right? Like we always see our supervisors as they should be able to do their job perfectly. And if they don't, then that's a problem. I think it's understanding that everybody who is working at camp is a human and is susceptible to mistakes or not operating in the perfect way that you imagine. I think it's really important that when you are receiving that feedback that you're acknowledging their points, right? You need to understand what they're trying to tell you. You may not typically agree with it, or you may not agree with the method or how they're telling you, like we just talked about, but you need to say, hey, I understand what you're talking about here, and I know what you're trying to tell me. You could do that in little ways, right? By asking questions to make sure it's clear to you. You can ask for examples. What did I specifically do wrong? Where did this occur? What was the action? So see what the event was when it happened so you can move forward with that information. And talking about moving forward is leaving that conversation with what ways can I improve moving forward? How can I fix that action we just talked about? So you're not just leaving it up to the wind, right? If someone tells you did something wrong and then they walk away, you don't know what to do to fix it, right? Other than the fact that you made a mistake in the first place. So know what the action step is to move forward and then how you're going to track that later. So how do I know I'm going to check up and know that I fixed that problem that you told me about? Mm-hmm. And then the next thing is speak up, right? Say, yes, I understand, or no, I don't quite understand, or no, I don't really agree with what you're saying. Can we try and find some way to compensate with this? And we'll talk more about that. I have some notes about it later on. Mm-hmm. And then finally, understand if they are asking you questions, they're not trying to belittle you. I think most people at camp have learned to ask questions so you can improve someone's learning. We talk about this a lot on the podcast, and I think a lot in the camp world, that asking questions is a good thing. Figuring out the problem on someone's own is really important. So if I, or a person who's giving feedback, is asking you questions, it's not because we think you're dumb and we're trying to lead you to water. It's because we're trying to help you figure it out. Mm-hmm. So if you do know the problem is, you answer it right away and you go, hey, I know I made this mistake. But know that that person is trying to educate you and help you in your learning process with problem solving and making decisions and discerning issues and self-evaluation. So many things happen from asking questions. So understand those are happening for a reason, not to be controlling.
Yeah, and I would also say that, getting feedback doesn't always feel good, and that's okay, right? Sometimes that maybe feeling of shame that you have briefly, or like just knowing you didn't live up to your potential, that's going to be like the memorable part of this. That's going to help you improve in the future, because you don't want to feel that way again. And it's okay to internalize that feeling, because that's going to spark change. For me, that's always what it is. I don't want to feel like I'm not doing the best job that I can. And like you said, Oliver, the point of this is to be clear on where you missed the mark. That's the first most important thing. Be clear on how it happened. And second, come up with an action plan of how you're going to improve. But know that the action plan you might need some time to think about that. It is okay to feel emotional about getting that feedback. Especially, I know that when I was a counselor, I didn't have all the emotional regulation skills that I have now as an almost 30-year-old. And I'm still learning that, right? So if you might tear up, you might feel like flustered and overwhelmed. And trust me, that still happens to me, where I need to get away from that situation and say, like, okay, I hear what you're saying. I want to come up with, like, can I have some time to please come up with a way that I can fix this? And then you can internalize that, and that's okay. I've noticed most supervisors, if you can be honest about that part of your conversation, be like, okay, well, when can we check up? In an hour? Great, let's do it. Or take 10 minutes, then come back and let's figure that out. I had some tips, Oliver, about getting positive feedback too, because I think that we are very bad at taking compliments. In general. So this is my permission to you camp counselors out there, is that if you get a compliment from a director, what's the first thing you should say?
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Right? Because they're complimenting you. They're not doing it to like need to spark a bigger conversation. They're noticing the good. And that's something that we camp directors talk about all the time, is that we need to get better at noticing the good out there rather than always just trying to problem solve. I know that's something that I really had to work hard on as a director. And also understand that if you are marked average on an evaluation, that being average is totally okay. Right? It first of all makes the above averages more meaningful, and it's fine to be there. You don't always need to be excelling at everything. It is okay to advocate for yourself. If you're like, well, just like it's okay if you get like a below average on something, it's okay to be like, well, I don't think I agree with that. Can we have a conversation about that? And then bring up some specific examples. So take a darn compliment is the first piece of advice there. The second, it's okay to be average. And third, advocate for yourself.
Yeah, I love when we do our evaluations and we explain to staff that when we are evaluating you, we're going to give you the grades that you are getting, right? An A is above and beyond, a B is above average, and then a C is average, right? So like, technically, if you're going to school, you should be receiving C's. But a lot of the time, you look at, even when I was in high school, it was really easy to get an A and a B. So it didn't always feel.
Yeah, and I think it's important, like we never used like A's and B's for that specific reason. Like we had very clear like levels when I was a director, right? Level 4 was the above average, or you're a role model. 3 is average, what we expect. 2 is you're not where we expect yet, and 1 is like, this is serious. And you got those 4s. There was no 3.5s. There's no minuses. It was very clear where you were. And I think that's beneficial too. Not that you as a counselor listening to this have control over your evaluative system, but whatever your average is, it's okay to be average. C, B, whatever it is.
Let's talk about making that adjustment. We've talked about it a lot, about behavior changing actions, but when you've received this feedback, you hit it at home, right? I talked about the feeling you get as someone giving feedback, but as receiving feedback, it's gut wrenching, right? Like you feel it in your stomach, like, oh, I'm making a mistake. I'm a failure. I'm not feeling great about myself, because typically it doesn't feel great. But how you react to that, I think, is sometimes really important. So we've talked about making those changes, the behavior changing things that you can do, visual cues like wearing a bracelet or a ring or something like that lets you know, oh, cool, I need to change this. Having a list of things that you can change, accountability buddies, etc. please go and listen to our other podcasts. We have plenty of great information that we need to check out as well. So that stuff is in there. Take the time to go and look for it. The important thing here, though, is that when you've been given feedback, you need to change the behavior, right? At this point in time, someone has taken the time out of their day to fix something that's going on. How important that is has now granted the need for that to happen. So if you don't agree, have a conversation with them about it, but don't leave the conversation about feedback thinking one of these 5 things that I think are pretty important. 1, don't leave the conversation about feedback with the mindset of, I'm not going to do that, right?
Yeah.
God, please.
Right.
If you don't agree, like I said, have a conversation about it. Number 2, that's not possible. The change they're asking me to make isn't possible. I can't do it. If you don't agree, have a conversation about it. Find a way to compensate or work with it. Number 3, I'm actually going to do worse. I'm now going to either intentionally or I'm going to just kind of shut down a little bit, and I'm actually going to purposely do worse than I was doing before because I'm upset about what you just said to me. Number 4, not only going to do something else that's worse, but I'm going to do something purposely harder to make something purposely worse to make your job / life harder. I'm going to be spiteful. I've seen this before. It's the worst thing in the world because you're just making everyone at camp's life a lot harder, and it's not fair to everyone who's working really hard at camp to make it successful. So when you're deciding to not do a job or to neglect responsibilities because someone gave you necessarily bad feedback, it doesn't help anyone. Number 5, shutting down. Please don't shut down. If someone gives you feedback, it is okay to go and recoup and take that time like Matt was talking about before. It's totally acceptable. But sometimes I've seen staff that have just shut down completely, and for days sometimes they are just not performing to the level that a counselor is supposed to perform at because they've gotten some feedback that they don't respond to well. And I actually have a bonus 6th one. The bonus 6th one is don't bring your problems to the rest of the staff. If you had feedback, don't go over to the next staff member and complain that your supervisor was giving you bad feedback or was asking you to do something that you just didn't agree with, because now you're talking poorly about that supervisor. It degrades what their responsibilities are and what they're trying to do to make camp a better place. You're now teaching another staff member that it's okay to question or not respond well to feedback, and you're now taking what was just you and making it a bigger camp problem. So that's my bonus 6th one.
Yes.
About accepting the adjustment that needs to happen when someone gives you feedback. So 6 things there. Matt, what about you?
That's so good. I number 6 was one of my points, and I think that's so important. Number 1, 2, 3, 4, and 6. So everything but shut down for me, that is like a grounds to get you fired. In my opinion, if I found out that if I gave what I thought was a pretty thoughtful piece of feedback and someone like said like, well, I'm not going to do that, it's like, okay, well then you're making a choice to not work at camp anymore. Because you're not in with this. And it's not like I would instantly fire them, but that would be a pretty like stern conversation, because there's a reason why that feedback happens. So yeah, you got to advocate for yourself. I want to number 6 that you said, the one kind of phrase that we said at camp was go up, not out. And that was just like, if you have a problem with your evaluator, so if Oliver is if I'm a counselor, Oliver's the unit head, and I don't agree with what Oliver said, and I think he's unfair, and I think he's power tripping, or whatever story that I've concocted in my head about him, I can go, there should be someone that he's accountable to, right? That I can go to that person, and it's their job to treat that professionally. It doesn't help the situation get better if I go to my fellow counselors and complain, because it's a source of drama, right? And drama is like another reason why people get let go at camp, because they're causing problems within the staff team. So again, follow whatever your like chain of command is, or however you deal with those situations. But I don't think any camp would say that it's okay to complain to your fellow staff about your supervisor.
Yeah. And
am I saying anything controversial there, Oliver?
no, I'm just thinking about, it's not just feedback, because a lot of people might be thinking this is like a one-on-one circumstance where like a supervisor comes to you and says, hey, you really need to improve on this. But I'm also thinking about the times where your supervisor for camp, like the camp director, comes up in front of everybody. Maybe it's between sessions and we're talking about things to improve on for the next session so that the next group of kids can have a great time at camp. And they give some form of feedback like, hey, you guys, we need to make sure that we're supervising our campers a little bit better this session, right? And they say that to the entire crowd. You know, it's not just the one-on-one feedback that I was giving somebody, I'm giving it to everyone. So if you walk away going, I supervise my kids, that wasn't directed at me. I think it was directed at Susie. Susie definitely doesn't watch her kids, right? Like,
Right.
You are stirring up drama when someone is trying to, you know, give the feedback to help camp perform better. So please, in your mind, don't think that it's just that one-on-one circumstance. It can be one-on-one, it can be one-on-5, it can be one on the entire camp staff when you're getting feedback. It's important when that feedback is accepted that you don't do those 6 things that we talked about.
Yeah.
You turn around and you say, hey, somebody thought it was important enough to mention that we're not supervising the kids well enough. They hopefully gave you some type of tool or method to better supervise kids. And now let's move forward with that method so we can continue to improve.
Yes. Thank you for bringing up that circumstance. I didn't even consider that like group feedback. And I know some staff who are like, you know, Oliver, as a director, that they're like, you have a staff who is going to assume that everything you say in general feedback was about them, even if they're awesome. But I do think that a great counselor will internalize that feedback and reflect on their own performance and be like, okay, well, you know, I know that when the only way that we succeed as a group is when everyone is succeeding. And if I'm not, you know, maybe I'm doing this, but if I'm not like helping my friends and helping my coworkers do this behavior as well, then, you know, then I'm not doing good enough because I'm not setting a good enough example, I guess. I wanted to offer kind of a tool that I use to help staff with if they're having trouble. This is kind of in a one-to-one feedback. So I had a staff member once who kind of lost his temper with kids, and not in like a really harsh way, but you could tell he was like easily frustrated. And he was a brilliant programmer. He could do super magical things, but he was easily annoyed by kids. Hey, that can happen, right? So what I did with him was I talked about how, like, okay, this is something that you are consistently struggling with and you want to get better at, right? Right. We agreed on that. And then I said, like, let's break down kind of where that happens, why it happens, and come up with an early warning sign, right? Like, what is the radar telling you the rainstorm is coming in? And how can you go inside before that rainstorm hits? What can you do? And we found out that, like, when a kid challenges his authority, when he says to do something and a kid says no, that's when his back goes up and he starts to get frustrated. So we said, okay, so like, what are some different ways that we can like frame our instructions to kids rather than telling them what to do? Let's invite them to do what we want them to do. And that was like a complete change. So if you are trying to fix a behavior, kind of internalize maybe what the trigger is and like take a step back from the specific action you did wrong, go one step backwards and be like, okay, let's mitigate that before it becomes a big problem. So that's kind of my tip on improving.
Yeah, that's such a good example of just working with feedback, right? Working through it and figuring out what the solution is going to be and what preventative things you can do to make sure that you're improving every single time. So, let's talk a little bit about getting those evaluations, right? So for the most part, most summer camps, to my understanding, do some form of evaluation, right? It might be a midsummer and an end of summer. It might be a 1 week, you know, day camp, you know, gives out a new evaluation each week. It might be a new staff evaluation, whatever it might be. What's your advice for getting an evaluation and making sure that you're going to do well on that evaluation, that you're going to work well? Because at the end of the day, that evaluation is going to be the feedback. How do you make sure that the feedback you're going to get is a positive one?
Yeah. I think that knowing what's, you wrote this, Oliver, but I'm going to steal this from you. Like, knowing what's on that evaluation is like the keys to the kingdom, right? If these are, what are my expectations as a counselor? And it doesn't even have to be in the evaluation. It can be in your job description, right? Like, what do I need to do to succeed this summer? And knowing that and internalizing it and converting them, I'm stealing all your points, Oliver, converting them into actions is what you need to do. And kind of, this is the perfect time. We're recording this in the end of April, right? So as you're preparing for camp, this is the time to really understand how you're going to shine in those evaluations. What I would also say is that when you get to an evaluation, you want to have those examples set up of where you feel like you hit the mark. Because if you came in and you're like, okay, one of the things we're evaluated on is cooperation with fellow staff. And you can be like, okay, this week I crushed it in cooperation. I did this, I helped this person, and I have these 3 examples, and I find out that I got a below average. Then at least I have some things I can be curious and ask why. And I can be like, well, this is my perspective. And these are some things that I thought I did really well on. So can we, where's the difference there? Yeah. So knowing what you're evaluated on and coming with examples is great. Did I steal all your points, Oliver?
Most of them. Thankfully, I had a couple hopefully in the brain that I could pull out too.
Yeah.
I think the really big thing here too is understanding with your supervisor about that evaluation and having not evaluations, but many conversations leading up to it, right? You should be talking to your supervisor about like, hey, I did this today. Is that something good that I should be doing? This is to cover kind of multiple boats. The first one being that if you have those conversations about actions you're taking, they're going to get more examples if you're doing the right thing. It's that dishwasher thing that we talked about earlier. They might not be there for everything, but if you talk to them and talk them through maybe some of the things you're doing with your kids, it's a really good way to make sure that they're aware of some of the actions you're taking to fulfill evaluation standards. Then the next one that's really important is don't have your director read directly from the evaluation if possible. Have yourself read it, read exactly what their words are, and then ask questions about it. That way you're getting more specific answers to what you're looking for in the evaluation. And that way you're having a more thoughtful and fulfilled conversation with them. All right. So now we want to talk a little bit about the switch. So if you're a counselor, it's really good to hear these points, but if you're the person who's giving feedback, we want you guys to really be paying attention right now. We're going to be talking about the do's and don'ts of giving feedback. Now, if you're a counselor, don't stop listening. You can still use these points to help with campers, your fellow co-counselors, which is another podcast we have. You can check that one out, How to Be the Best Co. But how do you have those conversations about giving feedback to somebody else? That's what we're going to be talking about here. So those first year leadership staff or those coordinators or unit leaders or whatever you might be called, assistant directors, this is a great section for you to pay attention to. Mm-hmm. So Matt, what are some do's and don'ts that you have for giving feedback?
Yeah, the first do I talked about before was just looking for the good and making sure that we're complimenting people and pointing out the good things, and that happens immediately, right? We want to, in as quick as possible, say like, yes, that. I believe that might be a Chris Thurber thing. I don't know, one of the smart people in the camp world besides, I say besides us. We're pretty smart, but we're not like Thurber or Brandwine smart, right? But saying yes, that to what somebody did that was awesome. Like, yo, you crushed it with your cooperation. I'll come back to cooperation. You crushed it with your cooperation this week. Or like when you stood up and like sang a silly song in front of everybody to start the talent show off, it really helped people feel comfortable. That's so awesome. Thank you for doing that. On the flip side, I would say that when we're giving criticism or negative feedback, I pretty strongly believe that shouldn't happen in public. Right? That's like one of the quickest ways to demean someone's trust is by calling them out. And the only time where I think it's necessary is that if something's unsafe, right? There's a tactful way that you can let someone learn from their mistake or let it go for like that 5 minutes and just pulling them aside and being like, hey, I just wanted to let you know this happened and that's not okay. Those are my first 2 points.
All right. I'm going to do some quick ones to get it started. First off, don't exaggerate, stick to the facts, right? You are giving feedback. If you're exaggerating about something to try and emphasize a point, you're actually degrading the information you're giving. So stick to the thing that is factual about what happened. Also, someone could be offended if you're exaggerating how poorly they did something or what could have happened if they hadn't have done something. So don't exaggerate. Stick to what's going on.
Yeah, it's the worst when someone says, "Well, you always do this," and they're like, "Well, no, I don't always do it," and then you've lost the whole point of the conversation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that's a perfect point. The other one I want to say is use specifics. You know, have the stuff written down if you can ahead of time, so that when you sit down with this person, you can say, "Hey, look, you were supposed to be at morning Thunderdome or morning meeting at 7:45, and your cabin didn't get there until 7:55 for the last 3 days," right? Like, we have someone stands on the bridge before you get to morning meeting. You guys didn't cross that bridge. Like, this is a fact. You're not, nothing changes here. So be specific, have those things written down ahead of time. Don't blame the person, right? So you're talking about an action that happened. So you're evaluating that action and then fixing that action. You're not telling the person that there's something wrong with them, right? They are a human being. They're at fault, of course, but the action that they did is what we're trying to fix, so that way people can always be growing and improving. And Matt, do you want to take the next couple points?
Yeah, I only have one more, and that big one is to just ask questions and be curious when you're giving feedback too. A great format to do that is say, "Hey, I noticed that this happened. Can you tell me more about that? Or can you tell me why that happened?" Right? So if a counselor yells at their kids, let's go back to that person that got frustrated with their kids. Be like, so if I noticed that, I would say, "Hey, I noticed that it seemed like you were really frustrated with Billy, and I noticed that you raised your voice at him. Can you tell me about why that happened?" And then that opens the door to the conversation that, like, you don't know everything necessarily. You don't know the whole situation, and you're not placing any judgments on them. Remember, you're getting back to that positive intent that this person is doing the best that they can, and that there could be more than you're seeing. And you'll be surprised how your feedback's going to change when they tell you at least what was going on, right? Because maybe that camper was doing something really unsafe that you didn't see. And that's why they had to raise their voice. So just kind of hearing their story before you give them like the brunt of your feedback. And if they already know, like in that moment, they could be like, "You know what? Yeah, I just lost my cool. I'm really sorry. I'm working on this. I'm really sorry." That's when you can be like, "Great. I'm glad you caught that. Like, let's put a pin in this. We can talk about it later. I think you got it for now. Don't beat a dead horse." Right.
Yeah, I love that example, because sometimes you make a mistake. Sometimes you just know it. You don't need to have a 20-minute feedback conversation about it, because that's just belittling you. It's making you feel awful.
Yeah.
It's really harking onto something that you're just like, I know the problem. I can't believe I made the mistake. I will fix it. And as a supervisor, as the person giving the feedback, you know that feeling. Make sure that you're aware of it when you're trying to give someone some feedback. Get the key points in there. I want to talk a little bit about it. So as the person giving feedback, something that you have an advantage in going into the conversation is the fact that you know what you're talking about, when you're going to talk about it, and you're even coming in, like we were talking about, sometimes with specific points, right? To be honest, you have a huge advantage going into this conversation. So something that I think you can do to make the person feel more comfortable about the feedback is say, "Hey, I want to have a conversation with you. When would you be free? And this is what we're going to be talking about," right? Giving them those 3 points of information is, I think, really important. Now, some people may argue to the contrary. That person is going to walk away and only be thinking about the fact that they have a conversation with you about something they messed up with. Yes, I understand that feeling. I've had that feeling. I would put the point in, though, that at least they are going to be more prepared for that conversation. They've already thought through the feedback that you're going to be having that conversation about and what you might be telling them. So you're already going to make that conversation a lot quicker. And they now have time to really think about the entire thing, right? They think about it from beginning to end about what they're going to be talking to you about. Yes, at a certain point, you do want it to be timely. I'll talk about that in a little bit. But if you can not talk immediately, make sure that they're setting a time with you to have that conversation and that they feel prepared for it. It's not always fair to be the person who's going into an argument with all the facts. It'd be like, it'd be like debate club for those of you guys who were in debate club. If I had months of knowing what the topic was and what the argument was going to be, got information, statistics, and facts going into the debate, and then you showed up day of and go, "What are we talking about today?" So think about that fairness.
I would say also that, you know, this isn't a universal advice. There's going to be shades of gray. There's sometimes where you can't give them the information, what you're going in to talk about, if it's more serious. And also, I think what you said there, Oliver, really connected with me in that, like, if I don't have time to give the person time to think about it, if we need to have that talk immediately, then you need to be cognizant of the fact that you're catching them off guard potentially with something. And that's why asking questions is really important, to like invite it into being a conversation. It's rarely, when you give feedback, rarely is it like, here's the feedback, get out of my office. Like that, it's happened to me once in my entire camp career. So yeah, thank you for I like that debate team metaphor. Were you on debate team, Oliver?
No, never.
No, me neither. No judgment. It was just, I was learning something new about you. I don't know.
Yeah, debate, mock trial. What is it?
Mock UN.
Mock UN, yeah.
Yeah.
All the above. You're not saying, you know, when I was like, as a child. Student government actually was where I ended up for most of the time. That's
okay.
where I had the most fun.
I believe that. I definitely believe that.
I was that kid. Now everyone who's viewing goes, oh.
They're gonna go to the YouTube video and be like, what does Oliver look like? And they're like, oh yeah, that's totally student council president material right there.
Yeah. The other thing that I think is really important here is that you understand who you are coming into it. As the person giving the feedback, are you calm, cool, and collected? If you're not, it's better to wait. You don't want to go into a feedback conversation that might be heated because somebody made a big mistake that you need to really rectify. It might be better to, if you need to, separate them from any situation that could become worse. If it's something else, you might have somebody else keep an eye on them. There's other options, but even if they're sitting in an office room and they're not allowed to talk to anybody and you just need an hour to calm down, like it's better for them to be there than anywhere else. And know that, right? Like if it was a serious safety concern, someone's going to have to address it, kind of get to it. But on that note, no, you got to be cool, calm, and collected. Don't just rush into things, not understanding what you're going to get into that conversation about. This is really important, and this comes from actually a bit of mental health first aid that I had, and that's about accepting the change. So a lot of the times we talk about people who are making a change, and it's important that you understand that the person who is doing the change has to be the one who decides how it's going to happen and when it's going to happen. So if you say you need to do this or you should be doing this and this is what has to happen, it's even harder for that person to wrap their head around. Whereas if they make the decision of, okay, that's what needs to happen, this is how I'm going to do it, it's easier for them to understand the change that's going to have to happen, and they're accepting it as it happens. If you are telling them, they're going to be a little bit more resistant. So that's why asking questions is always really good, because they're deciding the solution on their own. Try not to lead them on too much or saying you should do this, because that's just telling them essentially what they're going to be doing. It's absolutely imperative that they understand the feedback you're giving them on their own. If they're repeating it back to you, they're answering that question themselves, they're deciding what the change of action is going to be. And with that, making sure that they end with the follow-up, right? What are they going to be doing? And then you have the corrective action, and they know when it has to be rectified. It could be immediately, right? It could be, make sure you have 2 hands on the belay rope, right? That's a big one. And that's a safety one. It could be something that's improving, right? Over the next 5 days, I need to see this improvement, or we need to see this improvement, or I'm going to make this improvement is the best one, because they're making that decision again. And it could also be something that is by the end of the week. Like, I know I have to have the poster for the closing campfire ready by the end of the week, right? Notice how it's the person, I am accepting responsibility for what I need to do, and I'm saying I have to get it done by this amount of time. And that's really important. My basic rule of thumb here is when you're giving feedback, the less you speak, and if you're not wasting your words, you get your point across, and they are getting the clear message of what needs to be happening. Even though that may not feel how I answered that question or gave you information about it, I feel like I droned on, but speak less, don't waste words, and making sure that they're the person who's thinking of the solution. With that being said, we've talked a lot about those tough conversations of feedback. Matt, can we talk a little bit about the positive tips of feedback? I know that you have a method that you really love to talk about. Can you tell us about it?
Yeah, we've name dropped him. This will be his second name drop in the podcast. But Michael Brandwine, who is a camp educator and speaker and professional, brilliant person. He was just actually on the Camp Owners podcast. That episode will be coming out early May, so just before this one actually. And one thing that he teaches is the DLP method of giving compliments and praise. And it's specifically about how to do it with kids. So counselors, this is applicable for you, but also for giving feedback. Remember how earlier I said like the yes, that, pointing out what's good. So DLP stands for describe, label, and praise. So you describe what the person did, you label the characteristic, the leadership or the positive human characteristic about them, and then you give them a praise, like a great job, high five, one of those things. And that's way better than just saying good job, right? Because good job is so vague and it doesn't teach them the lesson of what they did was great. So DLP, describe, label, and praise. And then Oliver, you have another acronym, don't you?
I do, yeah. So mine is STAG. So make sure that you're making your staff feel like stags. So like, you know, the giant deer that's very impressive, has a giant antler, full of pride. So make them feel like a stag. So be specific with what their action was. You know, this is a lot of time hitting on the effort that they made, right? How much effort they put in is a really great thing. The specific action they made, maybe. So super, super important. Next is timely. So really important with positive reinforcement is that it's done in a timely manner. If it's done quickly, then staff get that instant feedback. They know exactly what the action was that they made that got them that positive feedback. They're ready to move forward. With that being said, if 3 days have passed and you remember something that a staff member did really good and you just haven't had a chance to tell them, go and tell them. Don't just wait. Take that time to go and tell them, hey, I noticed the other day you did this really well. But the quicker you tell them, the better the effect it will have on them. Next is be accurate, right? So this is, again, going into the entire realm of what happened there. So it's kind of like being specific, but it's talking about that effort again, right? Like the information that you're specifically saying. And then finally, be genuine. Don't just dole out compliments because they feel good and that you feel like they're necessary if you're not being genuine about them. Really figure out what a staff member is doing well that will genuinely come from your heart and a good place of compliment. I like to say that giving feedback, positive feedback all the time is so important, right? So positive reinforcement is way more successful than corrective feedback, right? A lot of the times people think of feedback as this thing that we need to be giving all the time to correct actions. And we talked the entire podcast about it. So our ratio is super off. But the actual ratio you want to have here is for every one corrective feedback you give, you should be giving around 6 positive feedbacks. This isn't just a number I'm pulling out of my head. This is an actual study that was done by Gallup researchers, right? Dr. Marcela Losada did a study about positive feedback and that, ratio of how often you should be getting it. And we know that more effective teams are doing it 6 to 1. So think about those compliments. And I've talked about the penny trick before. If you put 20 pennies in a pocket and you give a positive comment or positive reinforcement, you make a staff member feel like a stag, you get to take a penny and you put it in the other pocket. And then at the end of the day, all 20 pennies should have moved to another pocket and you've put out 20 positive penny moments out there into the world to let staff know they're doing a really good job. So great one to think about there. And understanding that positive feedback does not have to be for above and beyond. It can be for doing your job, right? Reinforce the action of doing your job and you will see staff will continue to do their job properly, right? We've talked about taking initiative in the past as one of our podcasts. Please go back and listen to it. Again, a fantastic podcast shout out for ourselves. But it's really important that you understand that staff members are going to take initiative, praise them for that, but praise them for doing their job because they're going to continue to do their job well because they know that they're doing is the proper job. So praise it all. With that being said, thank you so much. That's our tips for positive feedback. Let's talk about how you can get ready for this summer. Matt, what is something that our counselors listening can start to do now to make sure that they are ready for the upcoming summer?
Yes. So like I said earlier, we are recording this at the end of April when the world feels like it's on fire right now. And camp is a possibility for some people, and it's a non-possibility for others. I'll give you kind of one piece of advice is I would say that there's at this point, we don't know how many camps are running and how many camps aren't. And I know that there are going to be camps, if camp does run, if some camps are running, they might be looking for staff. So be open this year to maybe exploring working at another camp. If you had your heart set on working at a certain camp and it's closed for the summer, you can always come back. But I think this is the perfect opportunity to kind of like stretch your wings and fly a little bit to experience a different culture, right? Because often, you know, when I was a counselor, I was like, my camp does this the best. Like, we are the best at Gagaball. Like, we made up Gagaball. And like, you just have no idea, right? The camp world is so small to you. But there's so many camps doing really, really cool stuff. And you know, why not, if you're a lifeguard, why not go and be like a water ski instructor if your camp doesn't have that? Or why not go to a STEM camp and do like really cool computer stuff? Try something new. And if that's a possibility, then I think you're still doing great things for kids who need summer camp, whether it's yours that's open or not. My second one I would say is that if you are an older staff member or you were in college and you were expecting to have some spring work at your camp, that right now at the time that we're releasing this episode, the crisis text line, which offers text-based support in Canada, Ireland, the UK, and the US. They are a mental health resource for people who are in need to text in, that they need help, that they need someone to talk to. They're looking for volunteers in all of the countries where they serve. So again, that's Canada, Ireland, the UK, and the US. They're looking for volunteers to get that training to receive text, because more and more, especially with isolation happening and all the crazy stuff going on in the world, the services are becoming overwhelmed. And I think that's a great use of your compassionate nature that you learn as a camp counselor, and doing that to help the world out a little bit. And even if you can just volunteer a little bit and then camp starts and you go work at camp, then you're spending this post-college or post-secondary school time really intentionally and doing some good for the world.
Yeah, it's such an amazing service that you can be providing as somebody who is experienced with that kind of work a little bit. So.
Oh, and I'll just plug the website. It'll be in our show notes, but the website is www.crisistextline.org.
Yeah, I hope to see a lot of camp staff helping out there, because it's such a fantastic thing that you already kind of have a skill set to help out with.
Yeah.
I also really liked your, look at other camps, not because I would love to get some experienced counselors to come work here at Camp Jewel, which would be phenomenal, but also because you talked about that learning from another camp, right? Having that experience in another place that might be a little bit different from you. And my favorite thing was then you talked about how that you may play the best Gaga ball ever. And,
oh yeah. Gaga ball, right?
You can call it Gaga ball, which is something that Matt and I learned from each other, that different people pronounce Gaga ball differently.
Yeah, that's right.
Gaga. For mine, I am doing a slightly different pace than Matt. His is all very helpful for today's times. I just want to make sure you have some fun too. So something I did with my leadership staff recently was I had them all draw a picture of their favorite camp song, and then we shared it with each other on a Zoom call. And I have not laughed that hard in a very long time. I actually have my picture. So if you are watching on YouTube, you will get to see my picture right now.
I'm so excited. Wait, don't tell me what the camp song is. No, show me. I want to guess what the camp song is.
All right, I got to cover the bottom because I say what it is.
Yeah, our YouTube videos are going to spike with this. Wow, Oliver, you are a really good artist. It's the Princess Pat.
It is the Princess Pat.
Dude, that is so good. So you were not on debate council, but you were certainly in artist club in high school, weren't you?
So I have a couple confessions to make. I didn't trace. I traced a little bit, but I mostly used like a picture and I drew based off of the picture. So it is based off of other artwork but most of it is freehand. So I'm
It's
proud
pretty
of it.
amazing, man. Dude, I would never show a piece of my art on this podcast. So there you go.
But yeah, it's something really cool that you can do. So if you have a favorite camp song, grab a pencil, a piece of paper, draw a picture, send it to your camp director. Because gosh knows at this point, as us non-tech savvy directors are looking for more things to post on social media to get people involved, it's a great way to do it. So that way you can, maybe you'll be the person who gets the post on your Instagram for your group. Which is really cool. But I think I'm going to collect all my coordinators' pictures. We're going to add them all together, and we're going to probably put them in an Instagram story or something so people can look at them and enjoy. So it's just a nice little heartwarming thing you can do.
And you can send them to us too, right? Send them to us on our email or our Instagram. Are we ready to talk about it publicly, Oliver?
True. Yeah, you can follow us on Instagram. We have one post currently, which is just my face.
Oliver.
But we do have an Instagram now. You can follow us at First Class Counselors on Instagram, and we'll probably be posting more on there soon. From funny memes to what we're talking about here. In fact, Matt, smile. I'll take a picture and put it on our Instagram. Woo! Thank you guys so much for joining us. Matt, if people want to get a hold of you, how can they do that?
Certainly. You can find me on our Instagram, First Class Counselors, or my personal Instagram, which is Iscus, ISCUS. That's my camp name. Or send me an email at matt, M-A-T-T, at gocamp.pro. I love hearing your suggestions for shows. We've had some really great ideas and messages sent that way. So love hearing your feedback.
Yep. And if you enjoyed today's show, we'd be so grateful if you left us a review wherever you're listening to this podcast. Your ratings and reviews not only tell us what you like about the show, but what you might want us to do in the future. And it helps boost our rankings and helps more people discover.
Yeah, Oliver, how do people get a hold of you real quick if they want to?
Oh, yeah. You can get a hold of me by my email, which is oliver.gregan@ghyMCA.org.
Awesome. Yeah, so thanks everyone for tuning in. Don't forget to check out the show notes. We'll have a couple of things there. Maybe I'll get Oliver to take a picture of his drawing to throw it in there too, which will be really cool. And if you want to find out more about what's going on with the camp world, check out camphacker.tv or gocamp.pro, and you can find some more podcasts for directors and leadership staff and everyone in between.
Yeah, so thanks for listening, friends. And remember, camp is camp and camp's all good.